What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with reactions to the classics, and today we got another Billy Joel reaction. This time his album Songs in the Attic, brought to us by a friend, longtime supporter, patron of the channel, and Billy Joel super fan. I don't think I'm overstepping there. Joseph. Thank you, Joseph. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons who make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out the Patreon link below or the patron link on the end screen. The patrons make this thing happen. We put up videos every single day. All right. I don't know a ton about Billy Joel. I liked Billy Joel growing up a lot, but I mean, I didn't know all his albums or any of that stuff. So I've done some other Billy Joel stuff. There's a playlist below. Click on that when you're done. Joseph's brought some stuff. And I didn't know anything about this album, though. I did not know anything about this album. So we're going to let Joseph talk about this. I mean, I've got some research in here too, but it's going to be a fun one. Joseph says, here's one of my very favorite of all his releases, and a rare live album that I think you'll appreciate too, as it's deliberately very different from your standard live release, and all the better for it, in my opinion. Personally, this one came into my life very early on. I was 6 years old when my dad came home from work and surprised me with a copy. It wasn't for a birthday or any other occasion. He just spotted it in, I guess, a bargain bin and picked it up. Still remains one of the nicer things he ever did for me. I can relate to that. And there's an interview that I'm going to be referencing throughout here that Joseph found on different songs and stuff. But an overall question that Billy was asked, whether writing had become easier over time. And he said, no. Writing is always going to be hard for me. You just want to write the greatest thing that you can write, and you know what you're capable of, and you don't want to do what you've done before. You don't want to do what other people have done, and the more you've written, the kind of less options you have left open. But you always have to top yourself. I'm sure a novelist gets it when he sits down with this blank piece of paper and starts the next novel. And it's got to be better than the one before and different than the one before. It's a terrifying feeling. You sit there at the piano and it has these white teeth that will bite your hands off if you don't come up with something. On the other hand, it's a very satisfying feeling to come up with something. But it's the worst feeling in the world, spending a day trying to write and coming up with nothing. I don't think that's ever going to change. I go through that now. I've been writing songs for another album, and it's going through the same thing I've gone through with all the other ones. Am I going to go through this every time I write an album? And I suppose I will. So, that was obviously a long time ago because Billy hasn't written in a long time. I thought that was interesting. I don't think every writer, songwriter obviously feels that, but having to top your previous stuff, and he'd already done so much great stuff at this point, that's a lot of pressure. Joseph said, I thought that was a worthy inclusion in light of this being the 30th anniversary of Billy's final pop album. To the album itself, here's what Billy said. He said, we've gotten requests over the years, when are you going to put out something live? When are you going to put out a concert recording album? And the reason I've avoided it for a long time is because most people put out live albums because it seems they put it out like a time killer in between writing new stuff, or they just put out a straight ahead show that they do from beginning to end. Supertramp's done that, Fleetwood Mac, and for me, I've had a problem seeing us put out an album like that because you miss the lights. People are going to be playing the record on God knows what kind of system. I just wanted to stay away from what I call a stock line album. But we did decide to record a lot of the shows last year, and after listening to this stuff for a couple of months, the stuff that jumped out more than anything else was the older stuff before The Stranger. A lot of people aren't familiar with the stuff before The Stranger. I have these liner notes on the record, and I go on to talk about how we've always got a really good response live, even before the records did anything for us. And what was the reason for this? Well, I guess something was missing between the performance of the song and the record itself. I was using studio musicians. I wasn't working with Phil Ramone. Maybe my voice was different, but we listened to the old stuff and said, wow, this really sounds good. And little by little, we came around to the idea of how about we pick the better things of the older stuff and put out an album of that instead of, putting out a double live, retailing at $15.98, back in the day, right? And rehashing Just the Way You Are, My Life Is Still Rock and Roll, like a greatest hits thing, which is what a lot of people do. But our intention here was to showcase the older stuff in a way that we always wanted it to sound. The songs that we included here have a whole different life to them. They sound much better than the older records. So I didn't know anything about this. It shocked me that he didn't have the very popular albums before this on there, but I think it was a good touch. I mean, I've researched these things, so I think it's going to be really good. If you've never joined us before, the music will not be in here, but it will be at a Vimeo link below. Click on that, follow along with me. Let's go to the first track. You see it below, Miami 2017. And Billy mentioned in the interview, these are going to come from all different places he's recording. This one's from June 24th, 1980 at MSG in New York. And about this song, Billy said, it's a science fiction song about an apocalypse occurring in New York as a result of discussions the city was failing in the 1970s. Speaking at the University of Pennsylvania in 2001, he explained that he wrote the song while living in LA in 1975 when New York City was on the verge of default. New York was bordering on bankruptcy, and after asking the federal government for help, They were denied assistance. This resulted in the famous headline on the New York Daily News: Gerald Ford to the city, the president of the U.S. at the time, drop dead. Billy stated that the people in L.A., including former New Yorkers, were deriding New York for its troubles. Billy said he thought, quote, "If New York's going to go down the tubes, I'm going to go back to New York." He explains the song depicts the apocalypse occurring in New York, the skyline tumbling down, this horrendous conflagration happening in New York City. He stated that the song is titled Miami 2017 because many New Yorkers retired to Miami, and the narrator is telling his grandchildren in the year 2017 about what he saw in the destruction of New York, because it is a weird song title, right? And in that interview that I was mentioning earlier, Billy said, this is at the time of the recording of this album. That was on the Turnstiles album that we recorded in 76. We used to open the show with that song because it's got that siren at the beginning. While the siren is going on, the lights went out and we would stumble onto the stage and hope there'd be a flashlight to show you where you're going. It's kind of an up-tempo, urgent, frantic urgency to which it is kind of the feeling that the words are expressing, which is about the destruction of New York by government forces after we defaulted. At the time, it felt like a very real thing, a very good possibility that New York would default. Now it sounds more like science fiction. We had hoped to get it, the live recording at the Garden. We did 5 nights at the Garden and recorded 3 of them. It's really like pulling teeth to record anything there because it's really expensive, and it still is. But the feeling from the audience when you mention the Yankees, the Bronx, and Queens, there's a great response, and that sort of charges you up, and the song has an inspired performance quality to it. Almost every song on the album has an appropriate place where it was recorded, and it happened to work out this way. This just isn't baloney. We didn't just write this down on the album. It was recorded in those places, hopefully to get that audience response in it. Even though people might expect this on a lot of live albums, I hear this audience cheering for 5 minutes. And when I'm listening, it's like, okay, I got the point. The audience liked the song. Get on to the next one. We cut the applause factor down as far as we could. We just kind of went, okay, that's the way it went, over. Then dropped out of it real quick. We didn't want to belabor the point, which I appreciate. I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Thanks again, Joseph. All right, Miami 2017 definitely works as a great concert song, right? Because of the build, gets after it, dials it back again towards the end. And just an interesting thing to write a song about, right? It talks about at the end, there's only handfuls that remember those lights on Broadway before we all moved to Florida and the mafia took over Mexico. Just to have the mind to just write out, okay, what's going to happen if New York goes away? No one remembers any of this. So that was a really good song, really good way to start this album off. Now, I'd heard the previous song one time on another list that Joseph did. I'd heard Miami 2017. I've not heard this next song. You see it below. Summer, Highland Falls. It's off Turnstiles in 1976. Recorded July 23rd, 1980 at the Bijou in Washington, D.C. Billy said part of it was written in Highland Falls. I just moved back there in the summertime of 75. I just left Hollywood. Highland Falls was the place the hostages drove through when they came back from Germany and they went up to West Point. The town next to West Point is Highland Falls. Really little town. I wrote a lot of the music there, but the lyrics came from being in New York City for a while. And thinking back on it, me and Liz, his wife at the time, kept going back into the city more and more and more. And we just decided, we might as well move in here. This is crazy. And then remembering the kind of small town insanity that goes on in a place like that the lyrics came. I guess it's just sort of realizing that when you're in a relationship, it isn't perfect. Like the honeymoon is over kind of thing. And wow, I guess you can be as much trouble for me as the other things in my life can, which everybody goes through who has a relationship. That's true. The whole honeymoon phase, once it's over, you're like, what? It says that first sense of horror. My God, is it a failure? What happened to that great thing we had? You have to adjust. You have to make changes if you're going to keep a relationship together. But that was the first realization I had that, oh, wait a minute. This isn't the and they lived happily ever after thing. It went itself very well to being recorded live. It's a very simple song but with complicated notes. But we always like doing this song. It used to be one of the hardest songs to put into a set. It's the second song of the night. I don't know how many times people have gone to a show and the first song is always like somebody's big hit or a favorite that they're just going to kill the audience with. Then the second thing is, where do you go from there? It's a great, great point. If you don't have a string of hits, you have to come up with that second song. It can really be a letdown. The song always seemed to sit in nicely as a second song, which I think is the hardest song to get in a set. And we always like doing it. Liberty DeVito, the drummer, really likes playing this song because it's kind of clever in its construction. And we listened to the tape, and almost every tape we did of this song sounded pretty good. This was done in a little club in D.C. called the Bijou, and it just had a better sound than all of them. Not necessarily technically better. There's some clams in every song on this album. Every one of us wanted to change something, but it was like, nope, that was the way it was done live, so leave it alone with the scars and acne and everything. But this just seemed to be the best performance. Summer, Highland Falls. I like that song. It's the first time I've ever heard. I don't love it, but I mean, like I said, it's the first time I've ever heard. It's not a bad song. It's got really good lyricism and kind of what he was talking about. But he said, they say these are not the best of times, but they're the only times I've ever known. And I believe there is a time for meditation in cathedrals of our own. So I think that was a really clever line. Look, before we can really be something together, we're going to have to be apart. Maybe not. Maybe we're still living in the same house, but we got to get our own minds in order. Now I've seen that sad surrender in my lover's eyes, and I can only stand apart and sympathize. For we are always what our situations hand us. It's either sadness or euphoria. And then the verse 2 finishes, and though we choose between reality and madness, it's either sadness or euphoria. And the last one, with our respective similarities, it's either sadness or euphoria. So you kind of choose is what he's trying to say there. So I thought it was a well-written song. Next up, we have Street Life Serenader from the Street Life Surrender album in 1974. This was recorded July 20th, 1980 at the St. Paul Civic Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. This is off Billy's third studio album. Street Life Serenader. I read a little bit of background, so I wasn't going to share it all with you, but basically, Billy's almost about to be dropped from his record label, and there's all this pressure, right? And so he's kind of writing in this song about, what if he just worked the street corner busking, right? Just singing, just throw some quarters in, man. And the more simple life that would be, he was probably dreaming of that. In a way, obviously it comes with financial peril, so it's like, you want that without the pressure, but I get it. Kind of get back to just the reason why I did this to begin with. But in there, this touches on that. Streetwise serenaders have no obligation, have no grand illusions, need no stimulation. Midnight masqueraders working hard for wages, need no vast arrangements to do their harmonizing. They don't need a studio, man. So another good performance, and I haven't really touched on that yet, but really good performances on here, right? He sounds live as good or better than in the studio. And as you know, boys and girls, most acts do not. We're going to stay on that same album, Street Life Surrender from 1974. You'd think on a Billy Joel album, I would not have any difficulty with a word, but you know what? Los Angelinos, that's how I'm going to go here. I think that's correct. July 10, 1980, at Toad's Place, New Haven, Connecticut. He wrote it while living in LA, reflecting on his impressions of the city. All right, Los Angelinos, just some observations from Billy from what a New Yorker saw when he went to LA, right? Just describing the scene. Los Angelinos all come from somewhere to live in sunshine. They're funky, exiled Midwestern ladies, high-heeled and faded, driving sleek new sports cars with their New York cowboys. The first chorus, the second verse, then we get another chorus, tanning out in the beaches with their Mexican reefers. No one ever has to feel like a refugee. Going into garages for exotic massages, making up for all the time gone by. So it's an okay song. Like, I don't love it, but once again, I've never heard it. But, it's fine. It's a good performance. Next up, we've got from Cold Spring Harbor, his 1971 debut, we got She's Got Away. Recorded June 1980 at the Paradise Rock Club in Boston. It was featured as a single from this album, went to 23 in the U.S. And according to a friend of the couple, the song was written about Joel's first wife, Elizabeth. Joel's liner notes for this seem to agree with this, commenting, written in 1970, I still feel the same way. Now, this was 1981, Grinch. In an 81 interview, Joel expressed mixed feelings about the song. He said, I thought it was cornball for years. I had trouble singing it at first. Then I got into it and decided everybody has a corny side, I suppose. She's Got Away. I tell you what, you write that song for your significant other, you're going to be in forever. Although, they did end up getting divorced. But, everybody wants to find this person in their life. She's got a way about her. And then he goes through things. I don't know what it is, but I know I can't live without her. But I have to laugh when she reveals me. She's got a way of talking. I don't know why, but it lifts me up when we were walking anywhere, right? She just brings him alive. She's got a way of showing how I make her feel. And I find the strength to keep going on. She's got a light around her, and everywhere she goes, a million dreams of love surround her everywhere. So, yeah, it is corny, but it's really well written, and everyone would love to have that person for sure. At number 6, we got Everybody Loves You Now from that Cold Spring Harbor debut album in 1971. Recorded at July 23rd, 1980 at the Bijou in Washington, D.C. Billy's described this as a zinger that balanced out the corniness of She's Got Away, saying that, quote, I can be venomous, but I could also be a mush. All music critic Stephen Thomas Erlewine, who's a very famous critic, he's been around forever, described the live version included on this album as hitting harder than the studio version. Billy said that at the time he had reinterpreted the song as, quote, a macho rationale for being rejected. Her? Leave me? She must be a self-possessed bitch. Anyway, everybody didn't love her. I just thought that they did. Woo! Okay, let's go. Everybody Loves You Now. Great piano work on here, as you would expect. There's been some great guitar work on different songs, too. So musicianship is top flight. I like the writing on this one. This girl's become famous, and he's just telling her, you're now the center of attention. It's what you've always wanted. You can always have your way somehow because everybody loves you now in the chorus, which is the first chorus. And then verse 2, you can walk away from your mistakes. You can turn your back on what you do. Just a little smile is all it takes, and you can have your cake and eat it too. Because she's a beautiful girl, so she can just get away with whatever she wants, flashing a smile. But then he goes, the next chorus, loneliness will get to you somehow. So the first one, he says, you can always have your way somehow. He says, loneliness will get to you somehow, but everybody loves you now. Basically telling her that those looks aren't going to be there forever. And if there's nothing else there, it's not going to be lasting. But then he talks about his desire for her. And then later on, you get into the bridge, and you know that nothing lasts forever, and it's been all done before. But you ain't got the time to go to Cold Spring Harbor no more, to this residential area. She's too big time for that. And that's where he took the title of the album from. So I like that one. All right, next up, we got Say Goodbye to Hollywood from Turnstiles in 1976, recorded July 14th, 1980 at Milwaukee Arena in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So we only have 2 songs that were at the same place so far. So released as a single from the album 17 in the US. He wrote the song after moving back to New York in 1975. He had previously relocated, as we know, to LA in 1972. Billy said that song always worked pretty well live. We used to do it as an encore song. We still do it from time to time. That's the big smash hit bash Phil Spector drum sound with the echo. I was thinking of the Ronettes when I wrote the song, and then writing a song like Say Goodbye to Hollywood. I wanted to write it as a party song, which I had in Hollywood. It's one big party. The recording from Milwaukee just kind of jumped out. I wasn't really happy with the way the Turnstile Records was. It's a little bit dead, a little bit dull, and this has a lot of life in it. Now, Ronnie Spector actually recovered this, which is kind of ironic, but Billy says, I like it when people cover my songs, especially if they've improved on my record. It makes you feel good as a songwriter, and at that time, we still weren't making the records that we wanted to make. Turnstiles was about as close as I gotten before I went to Phil Ramone on The Stranger. And when I heard the Ronnie Spector record, I went, hey, wow, that's really good. I think that was at the time period that people were starting to say, who is this guy? A lot of people thought it was a Bruce Springsteen song, and they found out it was this guy, Billy Joel, and they were like, wait a minute, is he the guy that did Piano Man? So a lot of confusion going on, and this might add to the confusion. I don't know. Then again, I write songs which are all over the place, but it was always fun to do this live. We probably still will from time to time in the future. Now, this is where a young Sean intersects with this, right? Because this is one of the first 45s I ever owned. I remember what it looked like. It had the little Columbia label, the little orange and burnt yellow, and I remember it. So I know this. I know this version. I haven't heard it in, don't want to date myself here, but probably 40 years. But man, I used to love this song. All right, here's where we get into the trickiness of live albums, right? I mean, I know Joseph got this when he was young, but now he knows all these songs really well, and he loves this album. This is the first time I've heard several of these songs. Obviously, I shared my history with this song. I think by far this is his best performance, live performance. But I probably think that because I'm skewed. But the energy, his voice, Liberty's drumming is fantastic. The sax on it, like this song just works in so many ways. And it also has some really poignant lyrics on it, right? Bridge, moving on is a chance that you take every time you try to stay together. Say a word out of line and you find that the friends you had are gone forever, forever. So many faces in and out of my life. Some will last, some will just be now and then. Life is a series of hellos and goodbyes. I'm afraid it's time for goodbye again. And he hits that chorus, say goodbye to Hollywood, say goodbye, my baby. I mean, this song is absolutely fantastic. Speaking of songs that are absolutely fantastic, another song I know well, Captain Jack from the Piano Man in 1973. Recorded July 5th, 1980 at the Spectrum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's considered by some to be the most important and pivotal of his early compositions. Like, there's a long story behind this. I'll just summarize it. Because his performance of that song on April 15th, 1972, on a live radio concert at Sigma Studios on WMMR in Philly, and the subsequent airplay this live version received on the station, brought him to the attention of major record labels, including Columbia, with whom he would sign a recording contract in 1973. He wrote in late 1971 while sitting in his apartment in Oyster Bay, Long Island, looking out the window, trying to find inspiration for a song. Across the street was a housing project, and he observed suburban teenagers going into the project and obtaining heroin from a dealer known as Captain Jack. It's about coming out of the New York suburbs, Joel said in 1974, but in my travels, I've seen a lot of the same suburb all over the country. The song is sort of brutal, but sometimes it's good to be brutal and offend people. It keeps them on their toes. In another interview, Billy said, I'd actually written the song about the same time period as I was writing the songs for the Cold Spring Harbor album. I probably finished it right after I'd finished the album, and we were doing a tour for the Cold Spring Harbor stuff. And we were in Philly, we were in a radio station. We did what we called a radio concert, and we laid it down at WMMR. And they played a tape of the whole concert, and people kept calling up and saying, what was that song, Captain Jack? It became the most requested song in the station's history. And a lot of people weren't even familiar with Cold Spring Harbor. They just knew me from Captain Jack in the Philly area. As a matter of fact, for years, people thought I came from Philly. I saw a headline once, Philadelphia's Billy Joel returned. But I was very much connected with that town. As a matter of fact, probably of all the cities in America, Philly has more to do with us getting any attention paid to what we're doing. We've done it a lot in the last couple of years, but when we got to Philly, it felt good to do it there. It takes on a whole new life in the Spectrum in Philadelphia. It's a pretty big arena, I think 18 or 19,000 seats. And something about that Philly audience gets you going. When you start to do that song, it's kind of like you hint at it at first, a little beginning, and when you break into the chorus part, it's bananas time. I call it a look out the window song. I wasn't even aware of what I was writing at the time, and after what I looked at it, this is pretty bitter, this is pretty condemning, but I did feel that way at the time. I was tired of seeing a lot of my friends getting moused up from taking drugs. And I didn't mean for it to be an anthem of anti-drug movement. I just meant for it to be kind of a smack in the face for people my own age, maybe even myself, who were not facing reality, kind of having to some crutch to get away from it. I don't like to be preachy, but musically, it's very powerful. It was a song I presented another side as opposed to some of the softer things people knew me for. Captain Jack was kind of the darker side, the heavier side. I know this song. My daughter Mackenzie loves this song. She used to play it in the car last summer when I was picking her up from her job. She would play the song. First time she played it, I'm like, you know Captain Jack? So yeah, I just love it. Let's get it. Captain Jack lends perfectly to this live setting, right? That was just a fantastic rendition. The musicianship, and the drumming, all of it, obviously the piano work, but you could just feel it in Billy, and you could feel the contempt in his voice, right? These lines are laced with vitriol, right? It's just like, dude, you're a screw up. And, I just think this song is greatness, and it's not known. It was not known back then. It's not really known by a lot of people now. And I mean, even see on the streams, it's like ridiculous. It's got 654,000 streams. Like, it's the fourth least streamed of these 11 songs. I mean, it's way down. Like, this song is great, guys. But I think people see it at 7 minutes and go, I'm not gonna mess with this song. But man, it's Billy at his finest. It's not the Piano Man album, remember? So this and Piano Man on the same album. That is some epic songwriting. And I honestly didn't mean that as a segue, but it works perfectly because this song is also off Piano Man. You're My Home, written from 1973, July 23rd, 1980 at the Bijou again in Washington, D.C. So that's 3 songs we've got from there. Everything else is from different places. The song was written for Billy's first wife, of course, Elizabeth Weber, because he could not afford to buy her anything while they were in California. As Billy says in the liner notes of this album, corny but true, I was broke at the time in 73, so I wrote this for my wife as a Valentine's Day gift. I mean, when you can do that, right, it's better than a gift, so it kind of gets you by. You're My Home, the second most streamed song here, besides She's Got Away. You see a theme here, so I mean, it's kind of corny too, like She's Got Away, but I mean, it's really well written, and I get it. I think verse 3 sums it up. If I travel all my life and I never get to stop and settle down, as long as I have you by my side, there's a roof above and good walls all around. You're my castle, you're my cabin, and my instant pleasure dome. I need you in my house because you're my home. So that sums it up. I mean, if you can write something like that for your significant other's anniversary or birthday or any other holiday, hey man, go for it. You will be immortalized. Got 2 songs left. We're going to return to MSG, where we're at on the very first track, Miami 2017, from June 24th, 1980. The Ballad of Billy the Kid, also off the Piano album in 1973. The song is Joel's fictionalized version of the story of Billy the Kid. In an interview from 75, Joel admitted basically the song was an experiment with an impressionist type of lyric. It was historically totally inaccurate as a story. Just remember that if you know the Billy the Kid story. Examples of these inaccuracies occur when Joel sings that Billy the Kid was from a town known as Wheeling, West Virginia, and that he robbed his way from Utah to Oklahoma. The real Billy the Kid never robbed a bank, and although his birthplace is uncertain, no account suggests he was from West Virginia. It also says that Billy the Kid was captured and hanged, with many people attending the hanging. In reality, he was shot and killed by Pat Garrett. On the liner notes, Billy says, I sort of wrote out what I was thinking in the liner notes for this album, so now we're going to skip to 1981 interview. It's pure East Coast suburban romanticism as regards the West. I mean, you grew up in New York. There was no country music when we were growing up. There's no country and Western. Your idea of the Wild Wild West was what you got in movies watching Roy Rogers and the Lone Ranger. So historically, I didn't know what I was talking about. The sound of something like Wheeling, West Virginia sounds really great when you're living on Long Island. And Oklahoma and Utah and all these places, I mean, they might as well be Japan. They just sound so exotic. Billy the Kid isn't about me. A lot of people say, wow, a legend in his time. Doesn't he think he's hot stuff? It's actually about a bartender, and his name happens to be Billy. And that worked well live for a while, too. That's what we used to call a showstopper. But it had its lifespan. We stopped doing it for a while, then we started doing it again a little bit in 1980. And we got a really good responses, and wow, what's that? It must be a new thing. And it's not. That one goes back, as I mentioned, to the Piano Man album. The Ballad of Billy the Kid, great piano playing on here. That kind of seems like that's redundant, so I don't say it a lot, but that's always the case. Nice, epic story. And even though it's not Billy the Kid, about Billy the Kid, the Outlaw, the whole song makes you think it's about Billy the Kid, the Outlaw. I mean, it really is. Until the very end, right? The outro. From a town known as Oyster Bay, Long Island, wrote a boy with a six-pack in his hand, and his daring life of crime made him a legend in his time east and west of the Rio Grande. It's the only shout out to this bartender that he was talking about, but a really well-crafted song. All right, we're to our last song, I've Loved These Days, recorded July 16, 1980 at the Horizon in Chicago. Billy said that was done in Chicago at the Horizon, which again was a room that had a lot of ambiance to it. And that's a melody I refer to as a French melody. It has kind of a lazy chase lounge flow to it. And that was a song that kept jumping out at us in that particular listening session. It sort of summed up all these songs. It was the end of an era because after we did the Stranger album, we weren't able to play to such small audiences. We moved on to a different time period, and this just seemed to poetically sum it all up. A little longer outro on that one, so I was going to see. I just wanted to get a little more of the crowd noise. I thought that was a really well-written song. It is from Turnstiles as well, so about him leaving LA. And that's what it has throughout this song, some really clever lyrics. But, you know, it looks like he's going to miss these days. Like, these times are good. He knows that they're coming to an end. But there's some cynical stuff in there, too. We drown our doubts in dry champagne and soothe our souls with fine cocaine. You know, there's just some things, a few more nights on satin sheets, a few more times that I can say, I've loved these days. So when you know you're moving on from something, right, the finality of that, there's a sadness to it. I mean, you're moving on because you want to, like he wanted to move back. So it's not because you're moving on because you're forced to. But even when you're moving on because you want to, that nostalgia and sentimentality kicks in a lot of times. It's like, man, I got a lot of good memories here in these good times. I'm going to always remember these fondly, and I'm going to miss them. So while you're excited for the move, there's also a mourning of what you left behind. That is human nature. So I thought he summed that up so well in this song. All right, now we're going to get to my favorites. Honorable mention, the song we just heard, I've Loved These Days. My faves, I don't think it's going to be all that much of a surprise. Miami 2017, the opener, just a great opener. Obviously, Say Goodbye to Hollywood and Captain Jack. So you're going to see a theme here, right? I know Say Goodbye to Hollywood and Captain Jack very well. Miami 2017 is just a fantastic way to open an album, and I've Loved These Days was a great way to close the album. I mean, he really chose the sequencing on this well. A lot of the other songs I didn't know, so they weren't going to hit with me on first listen, right? But I still think this is a really good album. And when you talk about live albums, as we segue into my overall score, live albums are tough, right? They're tough to be good. There's very few artists that are better live than they are in a recording studio where they can have multiple takes and they can produce it and they can put different takes and sequence them all together. I mean, I saw Bruce Springsteen recently. He's 73 years old, but I mean, he's better live, and all his live albums, he's got a box set from 85 that's fantastic. You do have artists that are better live, and Billy sounded fantastic because he's a real musician, right? He's a songwriter. He's a maestro on the piano. The drumming was fantastic from Liberty, but there's great guitar work in there too. So live, the atmosphere was great. The energy was great. The vocals were great. So that's what makes a great live album, right? And like I said, a great live album is a rare thing. You can pick a few out of your head, right? But there's 100 more for every one that you like. Trust me on this. So a really good choice by Joseph here. My overall score on this album is going to be an 8.25. And Joseph says on his final thoughts, knowing that there's 15 shows worth of recordings, presumably still sat in the vault somewhere, I'm ever hopeful we'll one day get to hear more tunes, including the post-Turnstiles material from these dates. See, I would love that. For me, this is Billy's, and especially his band's live peak. And while he's never less than amazing in person, his subsequent live albums haven't been able to match up to this in my affections. 12 Gardens Alive from 2006 comes the closest. So a hugely biased 9.5 rating from Joseph, which I get. He brought it. He's got so much history with this album, of course. And if I give it further listens, it might go up the charts for me as well. But let me know what you think of this album down below. I mean, we have a review of some different Billy stuff, but we have a review of The Strange Rep, which I think is one of the greatest albums of all time. Yes, of all time. But yeah, let me know what you think of this. Give me further suggestions. Until next time, guys, I will see you.